Hey, how's it going?
Yo, what's up?
Nothing much. How are you doing today?
Doing pretty great. Had a fun stream. Learned a lot about tenancy, lawns, domestic terrorism, and Candace Owens. So pretty typical day of content.
Yeah, that domestic terrorism bit was pretty fun. I've been watching you for a while.
Oh, howdy. Okay, yeah. Then you're in on the whole spiel. Would you mind introducing yourself to the audience?
Hey guys, what's up? My name is Ryan. I'm a comedian, I guess you could say. I was on America's Got Talent a few years ago. That was like my first thing, and now I'm a TikToker, but I hate TikTok, so that's kind of how I would describe myself.
Do not we
Um,
all?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And yeah, I would consider myself friends with Papa Gut, who was on your stream. I don't agree with him on everything, but he is a friend of mine. So
Gotcha. You know what they say? It's a big club and you're not in it. I see the cabal of high-profile TikTok content creators getting together. It's like how Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were friends before 2015.
oh yeah.
Yeah. They're
Yeah.
like deep
It's
cabal.
it's a very exclusive group. Everyone wants to be a popular TikToker. That's the dream of
Oh yeah. There's not
everyone.
a TikTok Epstein, is there?
Well, we've been finding out that there's a few of those recently, unfortunately, but we've hopefully been weeding those out.
All right. All right.
Um,
Okay. All right.
yeah.
Well, good luck with your ongoing war against the private islands. I wish you all the luck in the world. Yeah, I would. You emailed me. I was delighted that you reached out and you were interested in talking a little bit about. I think in your words, it was the immortal, unchanging science of Marxism-Leninism.
Yeah, so I'm not like super knowledgeable about socialism, but I've been really enjoying watching your streams lately. Basically, I went to like a very conservative Christian school, so all of my ideas of like socialism and communism is just like it's bad, it's horrible, it's gonna destroy the world. So like I'm trying to unlearn all that shit. And like basically right now I'm in the boat where like I pretty much agree with like everything Bernie Sanders says, but
Mhm.
then I also kind of hate Democrats in the same way of like they, are disingenuous sometimes and don't really accomplish anything.
Mhm.
So I'm just trying to like figure out if I am a social democrat or if I'm like a full blown leftist. So I don't want to like debate you. I'm just kind of trying to figure out where I land.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk about that. So you said that you generally agree with the stuff that Bernie Sanders says. I mean, obviously, I supported him in the primary as well, and I still support him to this day. That's why I wrote his name in when I voted. That's not true. That was that chat. Don't listen. But I do. I am quite a fan of the things that he says. I am quite a bit more radical than Bernie Sanders is. I recognize that Bernie Sanders's policies are. They give us an opportunity to organize more effectively. So my support for him is more of a transitionary movement towards an ideal than it is a goal in and of itself. When you imagine your ideal society, what changes do you think you would make? Like what when you think of like how you would build a world if you were like premier of the United States?
I would say, I mean, first of all, I think healthcare should be a basic human right. It doesn't make any sense to me that we get public education, but we don't get public healthcare. Like, I think that's nonsense. And then I think definitely holding the 1% more accountable, taxing them so that, the wealth is more redistributed, um, all that kind of stuff. But I don't necessarily like what do you say when people like bring up the argument of that like socialism would quell innovation?
I suppose I would ask them for a source. People, I know they wouldn't be able to provide one.
Yeah.
People seem to be of the opinion that private investment is the drive behind ingenuity. But there are two fundamental defeaters for this. The first one is that most major technological advancements are made by the government or with public funding. Whether we're talking about the internet or formerly military technologies that are adapted to use in our telephones, in our cell phones, in our radio networks, in our television screens. I mean, the internet was a military project to begin with. Well, the big advancements tend to be done through public funding, and the private market takes that technology and finds ways to make it profitable. And while that is an important process, the government's not going to be putting out iPhones or anything like that. I don't think it's
Mhm.
the fundamental element of innovation that we like talk about when we refer to innovation. Most of that is being done by or through public funding. Um, and the second thing I would say, put simply, is that when we do think of like the inventor, what is the relationship between the auteur inventor, the innovator, and the thing they produce?
Um, I mean, I would say that if you come up with an idea, you should have some ownership of the profit that comes from that idea
Exactly.
because,
They
yeah.
own the rights to it. But for most private corporations, the actual innovation isn't being done by the fucking stockholders. They just sit and collect money. They're the ones who own it, own the rights, own the wealth. The people who make these products are engineers, technicians, woodcrafters, graphic designers, artists, coders. These the people who actually make, who innovate. They don't own any of this crap. They get paid a flat amount. They get paid for their employment. And my argument is that people are more incentivized to innovate when they have a greater stake in that which they produce, which is why I advocate for collective ownership of the means of production. If you work at a firm, if you give a portion of your life to a firm, if you build things for a firm, you should have a democratic stake in that firm. And I think that gets people more invested, and the data supports that trend.
I could definitely see what you're saying with that. And I think I agree with you to a certain extent. I like the idea of like the workers owning portions of the business, but would you with socialism, is it like equally distributed among everyone? Like every single employee has an equal stake in the company, as well as like the person who originally started the company, like it's equally spread out?
There are a lot of different ideas on this. We're talking about different cooperative models. When it comes to what you just said, that's called a flat co-op, where everybody has identical degrees of investment and involvement. And that can work for very small companies. For larger ones, I mean, if it's like 1,000 people who work at a given firm, that's obviously not very viable. Because at that point you're abstracting fractions of income that have to be parsed out to so many people. It starts to mean less and less. And at that point you have tiers, you would have like different sort of, think of it in a representative democracy kind of way. You have like a group of 20 and they work at a given part of the firm and they elect amongst them a representative, and that person is their manager. And those managers get together with the managers from other subsegments and they work together in a council with their elected representative. And through that process, everybody is beholden to the ring 1 degree below them. Every individual member of the lower hierarchies of the managers is beholden to the people who voted them in, and likewise the farther you go up to the top. And as long as the system functions, and it can, and there are co-ops that do this, you have a much greater degree of representation amidst all of the workers there. There are potentially more radical solutions, but that's a very effective baseline solution that preserves managerial roles while also giving people a democratic say and a proportional chunk of the wealth.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that was like my main. I haven't studied socialism enough, so that was my main thought. I was like, if someone starts a company and then they hire like 10 employees or something, and then they have to equally spread out the ownership of the company among all those people, then maybe the person who started the company has an idea of where they want the company to go, but then these people they hired maybe have different ideas, and then suddenly you've diluted your shares of the company so much that you kind of lose like the goal. But I think that what you're saying of like a tiered structure where different people have different ownership of the company, I totally could see that as like a good solution.
Yeah, there are other weights as well. Like some people suggest that for example, how do I say this? A person who founds a company, or like founding members, get 2 stakes in the voting and in the share process up until their initial investment is compensated for. So say it takes you 100,000 to begin a firm, until you personally have made back that principal, maybe even with some interest, you have not total control, but you have a weighted control that allows you more movement, more direction, more influence. And after that time is up, I mean, at that point, if you've been working a company for 5 years, you've made back your investment, the other people you hired 5 years ago have as much of an investment as that company you do, Like, this is one of the things, like if you've ever worked for a small business, like a mom and pop shop, the
Mhm.
mom and pop, I mean, they started the place, but then they'll like hire some guy, and that guy has worked there for like 50 years now, and he's just as knowledgeable about the place as the mom and pop. He works just as hard. He just makes half as much, and he can be fired at a whim. I think if you work for a place that long, I don't think the owner necessarily has any inherent greater right to the direction of that firm.
So it'd be a kind of a democratic process if at some point people are like, this person needs to be fired, then they would have a vote, and then that person would get fired if people agreed on it.
Yeah. Or if they want to have a managerial driven model, it could be like the manager gets to decide, but you can protest, like you can have like a referendum if you disagree. There are a lot of models with varying degrees of success, and it seems like they're individualized enough that they work differently and more effectively depending on the size of the company and what the company actually does. But the existing data is really, really promising. Europe and Latin America both have pretty strong cooperative sectors in some countries. And from the data we've seen, at least up until a certain threshold, because there is limited data on this, there is an increase in worker productivity and worker happiness, and even in resistance to price shocks. Just on account of, because it's more representative, the people who actually work on the company are more capable of responding to these problems rather than some like distant CEO, giving orders from on high.
Yeah, I totally agree that especially if you just have these angel investors or whatever, and they think they know what's best, but they don't really know anything. They're just pouring money on it, and then they can have horrible ideas about the direction the company should go.
Yeah, yeah, for
Um,
sure. And it's all variable too. I don't think there's one perfect way. I think that there is I think that what I would like to see is if a firm of a given size, maybe 10 or more people, I don't know, it's an arbitrary threshold, but past a certain size, I think it would be nice if the government said, okay, you're this big, you have to have some limited threshold of worker democracy at your firm. Like you have to meet this. It would be like meeting worker safety standards. It's just a government branch. You have to do it. And the way corporations handle it individually is up to them as long as they meet a baseline set of requirements.
so it wouldn't be just the state coming in and being super strict about it. It would be more like, here's the baseline that you have to meet. Yeah, I could totally
Yeah,
see
no,
that.
no more than like OSHA requirements, like you can't have your workers balancing a ladder on top of a ladder on top of a footstool to get up to the fourth story window. I mean, if corporations can manage that, I think they can manage like a baseline organization requirement.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I definitely see validity to that. So would you, in your ideal world, would a stock market exist or no?
Well, what I just described to you is called worker socialism. Or sorry, not worker socialism, my God. It's called market socialism, or a worker's state. It's essentially the dictatorship of the proletariat. That you may have heard that term at some point.
Uh-huh.
It's a very poorly phrased term. Dictatorship has a lot of negative connotations. The term literally just means a worker's state, but whoever the term was invented to be evocative and whatever. So worker's state, probably a preferable one. What I would like to eventually see is an almost complete decommodification of our society, which would no longer allow for the stock market to functionally exist. But in the meantime, while firms still exist, while we still have a market economy that's more or less privately driven, I think there is a place for stock markets. The difference is, rather than them representing shares in a company, the company's owned by the workers. You can't give out shares of the company. It would probably represent just betting odds, frankly. The complexities of the relationship between worker ownership and like the stock market are actually like really, really detailed. I would love to look more into it in the near future. I know there are modes of the stock market that can function alongside cooperative ownership.
Okay, cool. And when you say decommodification, like what does that mean exactly?
What you want for healthcare? You think it should be a right, so you want the government running it to be paid for by our taxes, and for it to be free at point of service. That's decommodified. We also have we have decommodified postal service for the most part. I mean, it's run privately, kind of, but it operates at a certain baseline that is mandated by the government. We've decommodified public schooling, like you said, that sort of thing. I think you could go further. Food, transportation, those are obvious ones. Healthcare, that's a very obvious one. And I think these industries need to be decommodified because their pricing is inelastic. It doesn't work properly in a market economy, not the way it should.
Okay. So if things are decommodified, would people still be going out and buying food or things, or that would just be provided through your tax dollars?
I think it'd be nice if there was like a baseline stipend of food or groceries that you could get just by way of being a citizen. And after that, it would be, and after that, you know, if you want to get lobster, you can pay for that with your money. You know, we have that right now, kind of with food stamps, but food stamps have like a really strong connotation of poverty and subsistence living that I don't really think is appropriate. I would much prefer it if every citizen of America, you know, if you want to have some beautiful, tasty apples, if you want to have flour or wheat or sugar or any of these baseline foods, I think that should be available to all. We can produce these in quantities great enough to provide them essentially to everybody. No longer tie them to poverty. Just allow everyone to have that baseline, you know? But if people want like a Big Mac or something, I mean, you know, go for it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's disgusting, especially how much food is like just wasted and thrown away in this country. Like, just like working in a restaurant, seeing how much just food that didn't get sold is just thrown in the garbage instead of like redistributed to people. It's pretty disgusting.
Yeah. One of the biggest misconceptions is that the reason these restaurants and grocery stores can't give out food to food banks or like give it away is because they don't want to be held accountable legally for anyone who gets sick if they eat that food. It's actually not true. In the United States of America, the restaurants and groceries are not held legally accountable for any injuries which take place as a result of a good faith effort to distribute food to the population. So a lot of managers legitimately just don't know this, so they'll just toss away hundreds of pounds of food every single day.
Do you think this is like part of capitalism that they want to throw the food away? You know, they don't want to give it to people because then they can't buy it from them.
Yeah, because if people aren't hungry, they need food less, which is less money in the pockets of the restaurant. Also, it costs money to transport food from the restaurant or from the grocery store to a central location. It's cheaper to throw it away. Not in the long run, because when you throw it away, it gets picked up by publicly funded garbage services. So it actually damages the economy more to throw it away than to transport it a shorter distance to where it can actually be eaten. But it hurts them less. So it's essentially, it hurts the economy by foisting more money off the taxpayers. It hurts the homeless because they don't get their goddamn food. And it hurts the general sort of ecological consumption state of this country because we're wasting so much damn food, you know?
Yeah, I think I agree because it's like we're all, you know, we should have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And like life requires healthcare and food and education and all that kind of thing. So I think I'm definitely in the same boat with you on that.
There's also an economic argument for it, you know? Like, why should healthcare be decommodified? The main reason is absolutely everybody needs it, and you'll pay any amount of money to get it. So, like, if you have cancer, let's say you make $100,000 a year, like you're decently well off, you know? You have cancer, and they say, oh, sorry, we'll treat you. It's going to cost 60% of your income. You don't get to say, oh, I don't want that then, and then go back home and die. You have to get it, or you literally die. The functionality of a market economy relies on the elasticity of prices in response to demand. That is to say, the more demand, the higher the price, the less demand, the lower the price. But with healthcare, the demand is infinite. So the price is essentially whatever the insurance companies and hospitals can force you to pay. And that's not a functioning, it doesn't even function in capitalism. It's completely broken.
It's basically like a monopoly.
Yeah, because you can't go to a different hospital. If you get a treatment, the hospital makes up a big number and then throws it off to your insurance company, and you have to pay a fraction of that number on the principal before they pay it. But like, it's not representative of the actual time, money, and effort that went into your care. Stitches costing $10,000 after falling off a bicycle. I mean, this is obviously like a complete monstrosity of a market system here, you know?
Oh yeah, and it's just because the companies are in bed with the hospitals and can charge you, you know, whatever they want to charge you.
Yeah, but sometimes this works. Like if you want a skateboard that has Bart Simpson saying "Eat my shorts" on it. It's like stenciled onto it. That's a luxury good. If that costs $10, buy 10. If that costs $100, maybe you don't want to buy that. Nobody's getting hurt over this. I think luxury goods are an area where market economies can function well, even in a largely decommodified society. But when it comes to human needs, this just doesn't work. And we didn't do this before capitalism either. Even back in the days of feudalism, lords had a vested interest in ensuring that their terrible, terrible, terrible living condition peasants had enough food to eat just on principle. Because if they die, that's less wheat being tilled. It's only today that our society is simultaneously efficient enough to keep most people alive while also keeping them desperately poor without the direct involvement of the state.
So you would be against having both a private and a public option for healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, it's better than what we have now. I won't let that down. But I want the rich fucks to be getting the exact same health care that everyone else does. The issue is, if you have all the people in Congress, Senate, all the people with money, they all get their secret private hospitals. There's no motivation for them to incentivize any investment in the public option. Even if the public option is just meant for like the poorest of the poor, that means they get all the high risk people. Like everyone with pre-existing conditions or people with type 8 diabetes. And then that costs the state a fuck ton of money because they're the one paying insurance and all these hospital visits. And then people look at the public option and they say, wow, the public option costs $2,000 a year per person. That's insane. The average insurance company costs $400. Well, that's because the average insurance company charges a higher premium, meaning that the people with fewer pre-existing conditions are more likely to take that. The system is skewed against the public option in a capitalist system, so I'm more in favor of making us all share the same good healthcare.
Yeah,
Sorry, by the way, I'm sorry if I'm rambling your head off. I don't mean to. I'm used to doing the solo stream thing, so when I talk to people, I tend to talk at them a bit.
No, I'm glad that you're doing that because I'm learning a lot, for sure. Yeah, I definitely. I'm a big fan of Australia for sure. I'm hoping to move there at some point, because I'm just kind of done with America, and my girlfriend lives in Australia, and I like how they do things there. And there, I know they have like a public and a private option. I'd have to do more research into it to think about. So
Careful.
you don't think that like also having a private option like would help the economy if there's like some competition between the private and the public option?
No, I don't think competition actually inspires better behavior from hospitals. In fact, I can't think of a single example of that actually being done. If the public option is being paid for through taxpayer dollars, like so an insurance company doesn't need to innovate. It doesn't produce anything. An insurance company only competes on its premiums. That's the only thing they have. Like, how much does this cost? How much does that cost? If a public option is free, as it would be, I think, in a properly done public option, there's nothing to compete on or with. The things that need to compete are the hospitals. But hospitals don't compete with each other. They compete for like geographic space, like how much of an area they cover that people will drive to, because then they get more people, arriving at their hospital. But in terms of innovations, hospitals don't produce them. Pharmaceutical companies do. And that is still a private industry with some serious problems. But the hospitals themselves aren't in a position where competition would lead to them behaving better,
Yeah, it's kind of like when the cable companies just had their, here's where we are, here's where you are. Now we don't need to compete with each other. We can just keep driving the prices up.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of failures of capitalism, ISPs. Capitalism relies on the assumption that people get to choose which product they're going to get. If you don't have a choice, that's that. ISPs tend to be 1 to 2 per area. Sometimes the one of the two is crap, like just crap. Like you're doing DSL speeds, Most areas only have a couple of functioning internet service providers. Some have only one. And if you're in that position, it's not you're not making a market choice. You're paying what is essentially a state-mandated tax to a business to be able to enjoy modern electronic equipment, because it's government policy that led to ISPs being the way they are.
Yeah, definitely. So basically, you would just be cutting out as much of like the middlemen as possible, which I'm definitely for, just cutting out bureaucracy and cutting out the middlemen who are just siphoning money and not really helping the people at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would take a pretty dedicated trickster to try to convince anyone that the way internet service providers work today in America is like good or functional. We're behind so many other countries in internet speed, it's insane. Even in some major cities too. Not just like in the rural boonies or anything like that. Sometimes cities don't have good options either. I had ContraPoints on my stream like 4 or 5 days ago, and she had to travel to a friend's house to talk to me because her Comcast internet was fucking up. She lives in
Oh my God.
Baltimore. Baltimore is a large city. It's insane. But yeah, I think if we are to maintain a market economy, it should be limited to industries where people can freely make choices on the purchase of commodities or services that they don't need but want. And even then, we can suss out the details, sure, but I think that's where capitalism functions best. And we limit it to that, and then we see what we can do,
Yeah. So what do you say to like the right wing talking point of like, oh, when there's socialism, that makes everyone get lazy, and then like it just drives the economy down?
Guess I'd ask for a source on that.
Yeah.
The worker co-ops are full of very productive people. Cooperative workplaces are in fact full of more productive people because they know their work pays back directly. If you're like working at a private firm where you have no say in what goes on, you just follow the orders of your manager or the boss or whatever, your work doesn't mean there are two states. You either stay employed or you don't. So you do the minimum you can to stay employed. And that's it. There are no longer any careers. Everyone works in the gig economy now. Doing a great job being a fucking cashier at Applebee's is not going to get you promoted to a corporate position. Like that's not happening anymore. That we're past that point in the economy. People are just trying not to get fired, and that makes people lazy. And I don't like laziness for two reasons. One, it hurts the economy, but two, more importantly, it means that person's unhappy. Happy people willingly give their productivity to ventures they're invested in, and that matters a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's why I do comedy, because I just am not happy working for someone else and, having them tell me, here's what you have to do. There's no upward momentum or any of that stuff, for sure. So.
And people hate their coworkers too. But one of the reasons people hate their coworkers is because they see their coworkers as obstacles to them getting through the day. Another person to talk to, just, oh, this person fucked up, gotta pay back their mistakes. Oh God, night shift last night, didn't clean up, now I have to spend an extra 15 minutes cleaning up before we open, all that crap. But in a cooperative workplace where people are beholden to each other, not to a manager, I think that really does beget better results. And I mean, I hate to say, it makes me sound like a fucking Poindexter when I say it. The data seems to indicate that. When people talk about socialism, they talk about glory, they talk about revolution, they talk about big, beautiful black and red flags waving in the, in the smoky wind as they storm Capitol Hill. But when I think about socialism, I think about like very obvious ways our system is broken and fairly well-supported arguments for how they can be improved. When people talk about revolution, they think it's like this glorious day you overcome the bourgeoisie. For me personally, what I think is going to happen is we're going to try very hard in this country to convince people that they should live decent, respectable lives, that they should have health care that they don't have to pay out the nose for, that they should be able to demand more of their bosses, more of their managers, more of their politicians, that they should be able to live dignified lives, even if they're poor, even if they're a worker. And eventually, the managerial class, the bourgeois, are going to get very upset. And at that point, it's really a matter of how hard they fight the inevitable to keep the power structure the way as it is.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that kind of scared me about leftism, is like the idea of like, we need to have a violent revolution or whatever. But I think, they're not all like, oh, we're just not going to vote or whatever. I definitely agree with your perspective of we just need to move everything slowly to the left and keep moving it to the left, so it doesn't need to be some crazy revolution thing. It can just be like, hey, here's a slightly better way to do what we're already basically doing, and then you can just transition it over there. But yeah, obviously capitalism is always going to cause the people who are in charge to, they're going to be like, no, we don't want that.
The thing they don't talk about is who starts the revolution too. Go back 100 years ago. All the workers' rights we have today, 5-day work week, 8 hours, no child labor, these were fought for by socialists and anarchists and by union leaders. And they fought for it through strikes, and they fought through it through protests. And for their effort, they were gunned down and bombed by the state and by the corporations who hired private militaries to shoot them. They would kill the family members of union leaders in their sleep. They would burn down housing tenements that they knew had a large strike-based population. When violence starts, when the revolutionary action starts, it won't be because a bunch of lefties are seizing control of things. It'll be because corporations and, lobbyists and bankers realize that the only chance they have of resisting the public will and maintaining power indefinitely is by killing certain people in our movement. And if that happens, I mean, if the gloves come off, of course I want us to win over them. But my focus of action has always been, let's get as many people to agree with us as possible. So when we are making these arguments, they aren't facing down 100 strikers. They're facing down 100,000 citizens. And that's the thing that I want to happen. That gives us our best shot.
So what would you say to leftists right now who are like, pro-violence and because I saw a few people on TikTok who are being like, nothing happens unless we're violent, so these riots need to be violent. And I'm like, I see where you're coming from, that in history, a lot of times things don't change until violence happens. But at the same time, the more violent you are now, it can just ramp up the fascist narrative on the other side and have people be like, well, here's the violent left. And this is, then it just ramps up their narrative of keeping the conservatives in power because they just see us as violent.
Violence only works if you're able to win. If your violence is stochastic and minimal, you're not striking terror into the heart of the state. You're painting a target on your back. Now, a lot of people will say like, oh, well, the civil rights movement, there were violent elements as well. Look at the Black Panther Party. Terrific people, those Black Panthers. A lot of guns amongst them. And they would follow cops around. And they would get those cops real nervous. But did the Black Panther Party run around just gunning down cop vehicles? Of course not. Because if they did that, every single member of their organization would have been hung from a noose the next day in the center of Chicago. So they were smart. And they said implicitly through their actions, we are not violent. You are the violent ones. But we are okay with violence if we need to defend ourselves. That was their message. And that should be our message as well. Just going around starting violence with police, what does it do? You get news clips of violent Antifa getting beaten up by cops, because of course we lose. It's the cops, obviously. Trump talks about it on national television. He brings it up in the debates. We end up looking bad, and another 100,000 suburban whites clutch their pearls and buy another gun and another 100 pounds of ammunition. Doesn't work in our favor. There's a marginal argument for violent protests because it gets media attention, and I can recognize the validity of that, but there's a difference between violence against property, which I think gets good attention sometimes, and violence against cops or citizens, which almost always brings about bad media attention. You can see this based on the opinion people had of Black Lives Matter following George Floyd. Before George Floyd, 50-50, whatever. After George Floyd, support was like 72% in America. But after that, all those news cycles of violent arsonists and Antifa and what have you drove that support base way back down. And now we're basically the same place we were before. We have to be very, very careful with our optics and with our narratives.
Yeah, it makes me really sad because I'm super pro BLM, and now whenever I say that, it's like, oh, then you must be for, riots and looters. And of course, like, you shouldn't be judging the whole movement based on just a few people doing that. But yeah, I totally agree that the optics are super
fuck those
important.
people, of course, naturally. You heard the statistic, 93% of BLM protests were nonviolent?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's not accurate. 7% got violent. How much of that violence was started by the police? How much of that violence was started by far-right militias? How much of that violence was started by police plants who threw a rock from the protester side, then dipped off to an alleyway to change into their fatigues and body armor? when you actually look at how many of these protests seem to have been initiated by the police, I'd be willing to bet as little as 2 to 3% of those protests had violence initiated by the BLM folks. And even with that, how much of that violence is throwing a rock through a window, you know? When you actually boil down the numbers, we commit very little violence. Like, so little. Certainly compared to police or far-right militias, you know? But we need people to know that, because most people don't think that. Most people think the BLM protests are dangerous now. And it's very bad for us.
Do you think the liberal media is also partially at fault for that? You know, because the news cycle, even from liberal sources, I feel like sometimes leaned into the violence. And of course, if you see a building on fire, that's going to be the most sensational news piece, and that's going to get the most clicks, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There were certain elements of liberal mainstream media coverage at first that were very good. If you remember in immediately after George Floyd, God, what was the city? I'm so sorry. I actually forget the city that he was. This all happened so quickly. I'm thinking of Louisville right now, but I know that's like the new thing, not the Minneapolis. Yeah, Minneapolis. Thank you. Yeah. In Minneapolis, remember there was that black newscaster who was removed from a scene of protest by the police. That looked really good. This was during the time when public opinion of BLM was skyrocketing. If the liberal media actually wanted to support BLM, what they would have done for months afterwards was aggressively catalog and document police violence. Because if the narrative is going to be dominated by accounts of violence, you can't just. One of the worst things they did, they were in front of a like burning building, and they were like, most of the city is fine, and it made us look like we were delusional. You know, the left. There was this guy. Yeah, he was in front of a building. He was like, well, most of the despite arson, protests mostly peaceful, and people lost their shit over that. Yeah. They don't do that. Don't downplay. Don't defend. Go on the attack. Police violence is out there. It's everywhere. Give it mainstream coverage. Buy these clips from Twitter users. Show this nonstop, 24/7. We are under siege. We are under occupation. And they need to do that. And they need to do it as much as they can. And I think to an extent they did this, but I think they could have done it much better. They did not do that as well as what Fox News and the other networks did their narrative.
Yeah, I think the right is really good at spinning their narratives because, like I've heard you say before, they're the ones who are funded by the billionaires who need everything to stay how it is. So,
yeah, yeah. Well, they're better. They're much better at the narratives they push because they don't care about telling the truth. Even the best, like when the Democrats want to do like an epic slam dunk, you know, like the Russiagate investigations, it's mostly like rumors, allegations, and then 2 years of a fucking investigation followed by committee hearings and so on and so forth. The Republicans want a scandal. They watch a Project Veritas video. They bring James O'Keefe onto Tucker Carlson. They scream about it from the fucking rafters. They do this Hunter Biden laptop thing. Donald Trump brings it up in the presidential debate and vaguely suggests that Joe Biden is a conspiracy mob boss. They don't care. Like, they don't give a fuck about fact checking. They don't give a shit about it. And they're ruthless.
It fucking pisses me off when Trump retweets something absolutely like just complete nonsense and then just won't even take responsibility for the fact that he retweeted it. I never imagined that there would be a president who would do shit like that. Like I always thought that like at least a president would make sure if he's putting something out to his audience, he would be fucking fact checking it first.
No, God, no. Wait, no. Because there's absolutely no need. I think like there is no longer any need in the mind of the average conservative to believe your narrative aligns with empirical reality. I think for them it's about winning, and I think they think we do the same thing. They think we're also crazy fanatics who will just say whatever we want to get power. And because they think that about us, they feel comfortable doing it themselves. That's why they come off so fear-mongery, you know? Like, the Democrats are going to seize, they're going to kill all your fucking women, they're going to rape your daughter. They get so froth in the mouth, and I think a lot of them believe that, even though it's nonsense, because they know they would do it, so they have to believe we would do it too. Because otherwise, they would have to question a lot of the things they believe in.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder your opinion on the whole disinformation being spread on social media. Do you have the opinion that social media companies should delete posts that spread misinformation, or at least like give a content warning on them, because I kind of go back and forth. I'm like, well, I really like that the internet is free and that you can spread, it's, a place where everyone can spread their opinions freely. But then, especially when social media companies start, feeding into their algorithms, or like pushing you down holes of nonsense and, white supremacy and all that kind of thing. Like, what is your opinion on like what the role social media companies should play with like the spread of disinformation?
I've got 2 points on this. The first one is about positive and negative liberty, and the second one is about the Hunter Biden laptop case. That censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop case was really fucking weird. That was really, really weird. Listen, I know it's all horseshit, but when you censor it, first of all, from a utilitarian perspective, you're only emboldening their victim narrative. When Facebook is like deleting like articles posted and Twitter won't let you link it, it really does make it look like there's a massive conspiracy to protect that information, which of course it's horseshit. The information was so poorly verified, the author wouldn't even attach their name to the article. Yeah, it's the Streisand effect. It just doesn't work out well. And I don't like the precedent that we're setting there, On the other hand, if this is about like TOS violations, I will say this. I absolutely think that websites have a right to maintain a terms of service. Absolutely. They are providing a service to us by paying for the servers, the upkeep, the moderation, the intellectual property of their brand. And under those conditions, it is insane to me that somebody believes they should not be able to cultivate the types of content there. What if you have a little website that's about automotive repairs? Just a cute, like a little mini website, like from back from the good old days of the internet, when it wasn't just like one mega website had everything, like there were a bunch of little mini websites, What if a bunch of neo-Nazis just invaded that place and they just decided, fuck it, I'm here now? Can you not ban those people? I do think TOS violations are a thing that should be able to be moderated. The question is, where's the line? What is it okay to police and moderate? Is doxing a person bannable? Probably. I think most people would agree doxing is fine, though I've been doxed on Twitter and nothing has come of it. Well, they've attempted at least by some crazy Bernie or bust types, and nothing happens there. But like, go further, What about like harassment? Harassment's potentially illegal in the United States, depending on the conditions there. Is that TOS? Like, can you ban there? If you get far enough, what I'm trying to get at, and I could, I guess, lead the question forever, is there are 2 types of freedom, positive and negative. A person born naked in the woods is full of positive freedom, absolutely chock full of positive freedom. They can do anything. Nobody's stopping them, no law. But there are negative freedoms associated with their position as well. Hunger and thirst. Healthcare. You think humans are entitled to healthcare. A man in the woods has none. Inevitably, this person is probably going to die, especially alone. Were they really free? I think freedom is about the ability to maximize your well-being through your own desires, as long as you're not hurting others. And if you're on Twitter or whatever, harassing other people or being aggressively bigoted, you de facto limit other people's freedoms. Because a website dominated by white supremacists is not one in which black people will be comfortable or safe to participate. Even if you don't allow doxing or direct threats, it'll still spread, and there will be implications, and there will be people who do it anyway and may or may not get caught. The attitude of the place is hostile, and that hostility is a chilling effect on other people's freedoms of speech. So do I think social media platforms should like delete misinformation? I don't think so. But should they have a TOS that is robust in managing an environment that is friendly to all people? I agree with that. I do.
Yeah, it's like when conservatives are like, why are you not being tolerant of my intolerant ideas?
Yeah,
like,
the tolerance paradox. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think it goes both ways. By the way, I say this for black people, shouldn't be able to be harassing black people or whatever. I say the same about white people. If you're on Twitter and you're being a big fucking memer and you're like, you fucking mayo cracker piece of shit, fucking go back to whatever colonized hellhole you... If you're up doing that, I think that should be just as TOS. I think it should be same way our protected classes work in the United States. Can't discriminate against somebody for being black, can't discriminate against somebody for being white. I think that ambivalence is necessary. We are all equal in a world which precludes discrimination, ideally at least, and that's the world I want people to think they're a part of when they go online.
Well, yeah, any person is capable of thinking they're superior because of their race. It's just that in this country we have systemic racism based on white people. So
yeah. Oh, but I've argued with black racists. I've argued with black people who think they're better than white people, and it's always a little silly because when you're arguing with them, you're like, wow, you're really out here against the world, aren't you? It's not as implicitly threatening as white supremacy, because white supremacy has like a very real, immediate impact. But it is still a little bit sad, I don't think the solution to hatred is more hate. I firmly disavow people who think that disliking men or white people or cis people or whatever improves anything.
yeah, I definitely feel like the hyper woke, like, it's saying kill all men is hilarious and all that. It's like I feel like you were saying before, you're joking when you say kill all men, but the little alt-right boys who are headed down the alt-right pipeline don't see that you're joking. So then it's just going to create more hateful people because they think, like, these young kids really do think that people are out to kill all men or whatever.
Yeah, a lot of people don't have a very strong perspective on what oppression actually looks like. If you talk to like a black person who grows up in Detroit, they'll have some words on what like systemic racism feels like. You talk to like a white kid grew up in the suburbs, and you'll have what are you gonna have there? Well, one time I went to the city and I got on a bus and the driver was black. And he looked at me kind of weird, but then the two black people who came on after me, he looked at kind of normal, and then he gave him a fist bump. And I just thought kind of, like, man, did he like not like me because I'm white? Like, that's kind of the experience with anti-white racism a lot of sheltered white folk are going to get. And that's not good. I mean, I'm not saying it's good, but we have to put it into context. We have to put it in perspective,
Yeah, you totally have to keep perspective.
Yeah.
Back to something you were saying about like keeping harassment off of social media platforms with TOS. Something that I deal with is, I do comedy, and sometimes my comedy is kind of poking fun at people, or like, sometimes I am sort of putting down someone who I consider to have a bad idea. I'm like, you're a fucking moron for saying that, masks don't work or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what's the line there where you can like, I feel like you could end up blurring the line between like what is harassment and what isn't harassment, because I've had videos taken down where I'm just dunking on someone for being an idiot, and then it's like, this was hate speech. I'm like, no, I'm just criticizing their ideas,
Well, the way I imagine this is the same for TikTok as it is Twitter, but if enough people report a video for hate speech, it's going to get taken down for hate speech, even if it was a fucking donut cooking tutorial. So in terms of what actually gets taken down, it's mostly a measure of who's angriest at your video. And what they're going to pretend to be angry about. When it comes to like hate speech or harassment, though, I don't think there's anything wrong with making fun of people or even being quite aggressive towards people. It's about those protected classes. For example, dunking on a black person is totally fine. Dunking on a person for being black is absolutely not fine. It's the same reason why we think hate crimes are worse than typical crimes. The idea is that things become infinitely worse if the motivation for your misbehavior is some sort of demographic characteristic. And I think that's totally true and viable, because if you like really fucking hate a guy, like let's say there's a guy called Doug. Doug's black. You hate Doug. You make videos making fun of Doug. Fine. That's great. That's America, baby. But if you're making fun of Doug because Doug is black, there's a greater harm there, because not only will black people see that and go, oh, but also on your end, if you're making fun of Doug because he's black, your issue isn't necessarily with Doug. Your issue is with the blackness. Even though you're making fun of the same person, you can derive a greater consequential harm from the actions and beliefs that you have. And it has a different impact, too.
Yeah, you're just making fun of someone for a completely illogical reason. Like making fun of someone's ideas, if they're bad ideas, it's because you're tearing them apart logically. But if you're just making fun of someone for an identity reason, there's no logic in that. It's just because you're like a bigoted piece of shit.
You can go further with it too. Which do you think is worse? You're a crazy guy, okay? Crazy white guy. You break into a house, 3 black people in there. You shoot them, 3 dead black people. Okay, why'd you do it? I don't fucking know. Maybe you were robbing them. You get arrested. Whatever. Okay. Second scenario, you bring 3 nooses, they got a tree out front, you lynch the 3 of them, get them in their sleep. People wake up to that shit, see it right across from their fucking house when they wake up the next morning. I would argue the second, infinitely worse, because even though in both cases you've killed 3, same 3 people dead. In the second scenario, you have erected an obelisk of hatred that will have repercussions outside of the murder you have just committed, the triple homicide. You have participated in perpetuating a system of violence that is far more severe and far more sociologically relevant than just like a random murder of 3, you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and then the ripples of that will spread out and hurt more than just those 3 people, because you're not just hurting 3 people, you're hurting, if people hear about it on the news, then you've just compounded onto the
Empowers more
systemic
people.
problems.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I go both ways. By the way, same shit. If there was a guy who's killed, like a dude who's killed, as opposed to like they're killed, they're stripped, and like their cock and balls are cut off, and they're like "fuck men" is written on blood on a fucking post of wood they're nailed to. I think that's a hell of a lot worse. Even though men aren't discriminated against meaningfully in our society, or at least not in the same way like a woman would be. I think it makes things a lot worse. If we're gonna hate each other, for fuck's sake, I think we should hate each other for highly specific, irrelevant individual reasons, and not for broad, sociologically derived demographic reasons, you know?
Yeah. I don't hate anyone, but I'll definitely dislike someone who puts out a really shitty idea that's hurting other people. That's basically all the people I want to dunk on are the people who are putting out ideas that are hurting other people.
Yeah, for sure.
I just have a few more questions. So I hear a lot that like leftists are pro-gun. Would you consider yourself pro-gun?
I'm actually kind of on the interstice of that question right now. I've been provided some really interesting arguments of late. I am on principle pro-gun, yes, but in terms of my feelings on how they can best be used, I've wavered a little bit about like tactically the best way to use them.
So what would you say to the argument that like less guns in society is going to decrease the gun violence, and like looking at like countries like Australia where they tried to, decrease the number of guns, and then that seemed to directly lead to less mass shootings. I mean, America is different because we have a huge hard on for guns, and it's going to be very difficult to have our people transition away from having guns. But then I also see the counter argument from leftists of like, well, if we don't have guns, then how would we stand up, when we need to?
Yeah. So the logic here gets really, really complicated. First of all, if we had no guns, we could have no gun crime. That's kind of tautological. But in the United States of America, we have to realistically assess available policy. In the United States of America, we will never be able to keep guns out of the hands of criminals. Period. We have a large, long border with Mexico. The United States has like more guns in it than human beings. It is not possible. There is no government policy that could possibly disarm this country to the extent that it could keep guns out of the hands of criminals. So I don't think reducing the availability of guns is going to meaningfully affect premeditated crime. What reducing gun ownership would do is reduce the number of suicides, because suicide is way easier to do with a firearm. You don't have to plan nothing. You have a fucking gun. That's it. And that is a serious and legitimate problem. Now, with that being said, arguments aside about the availability of guns, the guns that we do have in this country, numerous as they are. Wait, hold on. Somebody in chat says the U.S. exports guns to Mexico. Yeah, and then Mexico sells them back to us, to criminals. Yeah, no shit. We sell the guns to them, and then they go. Wait, do you think we're going to cut gun manufacturing? How much are you expecting from Washington here? Holy shit. When it comes to the guns that we have, when it comes to their use in violent crime, the vast majority of that crime is done in the context of the drug war. Most of the gun crimes that we have in this country are gangs fighting gangs because they're protecting territory and resources that they use to sell drugs, because that's how they make their money, because there are no other economic opportunities. The cartel and the drug war are like the two biggest factors in the propensity for the illegal use of guns in this country. If we deal with the drug war, we deal with that whole system. And then the only remaining uses of gun violence are stochastic, individualized, unplanned crimes, acts of terror like school shootings, and in suicides. You could cut down on suicides by getting rid of guns to an extent, As for the stochastic use of violence, I don't think it's possible to get rid of guns to the point that they would be able to meaningfully impact those numbers. So the real thing we're arguing over here is suicides. What's the benefit of owning guns? Well, I personally believe, as a moral principle, humans should have the right to defend themselves against impositions from higher authority forces. Whether that be the state, the police, or violent militias, I do think on a moral level, I do think humans should be entitled to that. For most of human society, we did. The highest threat humans could do to others was like a sword or a crossbow. And individuals could get that. If they were a hunter, they could get these things. But nowadays, the military has tanks and drones and such. How much can we meaningfully resist that? Well, if you look at the data, it looks like kind of, because you resist military occupation in cities that have fighting in them, but you can't actually fight the military. How do military coups work? Well, usually the military steps out and doesn't actually involve itself in internal coups. Military either shuts down a coup or it removes itself from the situation to see who wins. We can't fight the military. Can we fight state and police forces? Well, that depends. What I'm getting at here is I think the data is really, really complicated. What I care about most right now is ending the drug war, is improving the mental health of the people in this country, is making healthcare more easily affordable, because a ton of suicides come from people who have no way out and are burdened by medical debt. These very real solutions that we can implement to fix some of the problems we attribute to guns without actually affecting the gun ownership. And if we do all that and still find there are issues with guns, maybe we can tackle that, you know?
Yeah, I think something I agree with people on the right, even though they make this point disingenuously a lot of times, is that we do need to like look out for the mental health of young people, and that, you know, most of the school shootings are probably more caused because of their mental health than, you know, the guns necessarily. But I don't know. I definitely would still be pro, you know, keep the background checks, you know, strict. And I definitely like how they do it in Japan, where you have to have a gun license, you have to pass a test, as if, because to me, I feel like owning a gun would be similar to owning a car. It's like something that I feel like people should probably have access to, but you should just have access to it in a way where it's, you know, responsible, and not just anyone can get a gun. And I understand that like criminals are going to have guns, and the more difficult you make it for other people to get guns, like the only people you're really hurting are the citizens. I guess I get that argument.
It's a half truth. The problem is, this is mostly a United States of America thing. In England, you can get rid of guns enough that even criminals can't get a hold of it. Guns are very hard to come by in England, you know? In the United States of America, there are so many that I can't fathom any policy being made to meaningfully affect the ability for a person to get their hands on a gun. We can't keep people from getting fucking heroin in this country, you know? We can't keep people from getting their hands on illicit drugs. I don't know how we could possibly expect to do much better with illicit firearms. There's somebody in chat talking about mass shootings. What we have to understand is that, first of all, there are mass deaths in other countries, even if they don't have guns. Guns do make it easier. And second of all, mass shootings are statistically a minuscule portion of the harm done by guns in this country. We have to recognize that. I think if we want to deal with school shootings, the solution here should be better mental health checks, better systems in place to give these kids the sort of supervision they need. Not getting rid of all guns. You're never going to be able to get rid of all guns enough to like affect school shootings. A rich kid from the suburbs will always be able to get one. Always. You can't stop that from happening. So let's fix the real problem here, which is with the people. Oh yeah, no school shootings without schools. That's true. If we get rid of all schooling, we will technically be rid of that problem. That is true. Sorry, there were people in chat.
If there's no tests, no cases.
True. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Listen, I'm following in the presidential in the presidential spirit here. I believe in that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So would you be completely for decriminalizing drugs? I would say I'm pretty much for decriminalizing drugs.
Yeah, or legalizing it. Yeah. Criminal restrictions are clearly not working at preventing people from accessing them at all, even slightly. And the policy harm that we've done by locking these folks up is unfathomable. I think that I think so much better could be done if we just treated addiction like a mental health issue, destigmatize the whole problem, and stop throwing people in the slammer for it. There's no good goddamn argument for continuing our drug policy. Portugal decriminalized all drugs. Have you looked at what they did?
No, I haven't seen that.
It's phenomenal. They were like, oh shit, we've got a lot of druggies in our country. That kind of sucks. What if we, you know what? What if we just stopped locking them up? And they did. Swear to God, they did. And the results from that have been spectacular. The results from that have been just, it's as far as I'm concerned, it's indefensible to not pursue their policy, or at least a version of it.
And it really does just target people of color, because you have the drug war with people of color, and then you have, middle class people who are addicted to opioids, but they're not going to jail for it, and it's the same thing.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's kind of a class divide issue, People tend not to go to jail quite as much for the opiate issues as they do for the marijuana issue, even though one of them ends up causing far more harm to society. But man, right now, the most we can do is just hope Biden actually decriminalizes marijuana. That's pretty much all we can really hope for. A lot of these, along with socialism, a lot of these problems feel so insurmountable because the public opinion is just not there. There's so much work to be done, But one of the issues that I have is that people get in their head this pessimism. What I want is so far away from what can happen that they just give up. They stop involving themselves in the processes which allow us to move forward. And that's very dangerous, and it sets a very dangerous precedent.
Yeah, I think you have to have your idealistic society that you want to work towards, and then you have to say, okay, well, where are we at right now? What pragmatic steps can we take to get towards that? Which I think that's why you, me, and ContraPoints are all, very annoyed with people who are the Bernie busters, or the people who aren't going to vote because they're like, I want my perfect society now. And it's like, well, you're not going to get that. We have to deal with what we have right now. You're
not ever going to get it, actually, at the way, if you don't participate in the electoral process, you'll never get it. You'll have to find me a single successful socialist group that has ever completely abstained from electoralism in a bourgeois democracy. Just one. You never will be able to. Even Lenin did. That wasn't even a bourgeois democracy. There was like shoddy, pseudo-legitimate Tsarist government, and he would still put his neck in the ring. The idea that you can build a socialist movement without meeting people at their current level of radicalization is just ludicrous. Right now, most Democrats care about getting Trump out. They care about dealing with COVID. They care about BLM. These are flashpoint issues that they are deeply invested in. We need to meet them there. We need to say, wow, what a great issue you have here. Agree completely. Thank you. Let's fight together on this. Hey, by the way, wouldn't this whole coronavirus thing be much easier to deal with if we all had publicly accessible healthcare? Hey, aren't you feeling a little bit strapped in the wallet right now? Hey, BLM, can't help but notice. BLM started under Obama. What did he do? He shit-talked them. Even Ruth Bader Ginsburg shit-talked them, said that the kneeling on the fields thing was irresponsible. That's kind of wacky. I thought these guys were supposed to be represented us. You get these lines in, and you get the right people motivated and changed in the right way, and eventually down the line these people get way farther left-leaning.
Yeah, I definitely was like a big fan of Obama until you start really looking into the ways he fucked up and how he's did things that are against what we would consider progressive now. And it's just like, but yeah, I'm not gonna be someone who just wants to like shit all over liberals all the time. Although I do get really annoyed with a lot of the things they do. I think I more am just someone who, like you said, wants to meet people where they are and then move towards a better solution. But I don't know. I think most of the qualms I had about, the leftist movement, I feel like you explaining how you could set up a business in a way where it would work. Like, I feel like that makes sense to me. Is your ultimate goal Communism, because that's what people say is like socialism is a transitional phase before communism.
You know, Karl Marx didn't actually make a distinction between socialism and communism. He didn't really use the term socialism. He just used the term communism, which was an eventual end goal that you transition to after you've established a workers' state. I want to establish a workers' state. I want workers to democratically control the means of production. I want the system to be beholden to the interests of the majority. And if we move further left from that point, I think that's just delightful. But frankly, I feel we have so many struggles to overcome in our pursuit of a workers' state that I would rather focus on that intermediary period than speculate which systems may be viable when the material conditions we live in are so different from that which we live in now. You know?
And how would you say that like you would prepare yourself for, because I know there are many countries that have had a socialist revolution and then it leaves a power vacuum and then a dictator comes in. Like what would you do to like make sure that that doesn't happen?
Well, because generally speaking, historically, those revolutions were led by a group of peasants radicalized by middle-class, well-educated writers who had led them in a revolution. And then from the ensuing power vacuum, the only person, it seems, who had the authority and the know-how to actually manage the government they took control of were the elite caste of well-off vanguardists who led all of the peasants. I'm not here for that. I don't think that's a very viable solution to problems of worker inequality, to ensure that a very small group of people with a distinct set of class interests are the ones who achieve power. What I'd like to see, if I could be real specific with it, was that our political system gets fixed up just a smidge. Third parties are viable. Maybe we have a socialist party, proper socialists, not just Bernie Sanders, and they get more and more support over time. We win the optics battle. We move people to the left, and at that point, you have a large portion of the population that's socialist and a decent portion of the electorate, the elected officials who are socialist or at least represent socialists. And when that time comes, you push for harder and harder reform policies that really put the squeeze on the bourgeois, put the squeeze on established power structures. And if they try to do something about it, if they try to do something to fuck that perfectly legitimate democratic process up. I'm not talking about a power grab here. This is democracy. If they try to do something to fuck that up, if they push back too hard, then we crack down on that. Because I can tell you, there are socialist revolutions that have led to brutal dictatorships afterwards. But even more frequent than that are revolutionaries or even just reformists cracked down on by the CIA, by international capitalism, or by their own governments. All those democratically elected Latin American socialists, the people that the CIA stomped on and replaced with the likes of Pinochet or other absolutely monstrous dictators, those are the consequences of not going hard when the time comes, or not having the power necessary to defend yourself when the time comes. And that is not a situation I want to see American socialists subjected to again. It happened to the Black Panther Party back in the 1960s. They made real change, real effort. What'd they do? Government co-opted everything good they did it worse, shot up their leaders, put plants in there to disseminate information and disinfo, fucked up their leadership. We can't have that happen again. So we have to be large and strong and robust and democratically energized so that if they try something, we win.
Yeah, I would consider myself like, I don't know if I'm like fully a pacifist. I'm definitely against just attacking people unprovoked, and I definitely feel like I'm against us going into the Middle East and meddling there and everything. But I'm definitely for defending ourselves. And like an example is if like you were saying, like Trump tries to stage a coup because he gets voted out, I would definitely be like, at that point, violence is necessary, because if he tries to, have a violent coup, then we can't just be like, oh, well, I'm a pacifist, so I'm not going to fight back.
Yeah, exactly. Hypothetically, in Minecraft, of course, we would never, ever, at any point, threaten violence against the rightful president of the United States of America, Donald Trump. And in that hypothetical world you just described. Yeah, of course.
I'm saying if he stages an unrightful coup, which
he would never
is hypothetical and which would never happen.
Of course. Yeah, people tend to think violence is in and of itself a bad. Violence is the way the world is. The question is it used for good or for bad? largely it's used for bad because violence is only a tool the powerful can use, and the powerful tend to be unrepresentative of the interests of the population. But if you're going to use violence to stop a fascist coup, Hitler said it himself. He was asked, what could have been done to have stopped me? And he said, the only thing that could have stopped me was if in the formation of my movement, I had been crushed with utter and merciless resolve. He recognized that once the ball got rolling for him, nothing short of a bombing of his base of operations or the systemic elimination of his officers could have really stopped him. And while that is horrible, I present to you the war crimes of Nazi Germany. You know, you choose your evil. I know which one I'd choose.
You're saying you would kill Hitler?
Yeah, I would. I know. Hypothetically, you know, I would never. Hitler? Nah, he was. You know, he's a state diplomat. You know, an official. I would never engage in violence against somebody.
He's an artist.
Yeah, an artist, such prominence. You know, a great statesman, a public orator. You know, I would. Yeah, yeah. I'm rolling to near the end of stream time now. Was there another final meme that you wanted to hit on?
Yeah, just one last question. Sorry if all my points are just memes because I'm not super educated. But
no. When I say I mean meme, everything is a meme. I do not mean it in a derogatory way. Yeah, 100%. Go for it.
Okay, cool. So if you did get to a socialist state, would then the government still run in a similar way as it is now, where you would like have elected officials and all that, or would that be different?
I think I would prefer a type of liquid democracy. What we have now is a form of representative democracy, which there are some benefits to and some huge downsides. The benefits are that complicated policy decisions can't be decided on via referendum. Do you want a referendum deciding like international affairs, like should we denounce this government or should we work on this trade policy? That's insane. Of course not. The average person's not gonna be capable of meaningfully contributing to that, even in a well-educated society. That's just asking for trouble. And there are some piece of information that are kept state secrets for good reason too. You know, in terms of spying on other countries or warfare, we don't live in a utopia. Like, these things need to be done. On the other hand, with regards to direct democracy, there are some policy issues that our government is just not doing, even though the majority of the population is okay with it. The majority of the population is, as I understand it, good for decommodified healthcare, or at the very least a public option. So if that were left to a referendum, there you go. Now, how do you actually do that? Well, you can't decide method by referendum. You can only decide intent. Method has to be left to elected representatives. I think a healthy mix of a few things. First of all, liquid democracy. There should be referendums on the ballot. And we shouldn't just vote every 2 years either. Maybe once every year we have ballots, and every other year we have elected officials. Ballots for referendums, I mean. And a lot of that should be on the referendum ballot. I think that people should, you know, weigh in on that. And additionally, we need third parties to function. We need ranked choice voting.
Absolutely.
We need all these things. And I genuinely believe that if we can just do that, more referendum, more viability of third parties, so we get rid of the spoiler effect, I think that on its own would fix so many problems in this country. Like so many problems in this country. Even if you keep capitalism, I think that would fix so much. Now, you could fix more by getting, you know, fixing that capitalism thing up a little bit, but that on its own is a huge change.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I like about Australia is how they have 6 parties and ranked choice, and it, you know, it makes it so you don't have this fucking bullshit 2-party system.
Have you been to Australia?
I have been to Australia, yeah.
You have?
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that you were prepared for the heat when you moved there. It's only gotten worse.
Oh yeah, it's bad, yeah. Oh, you said that you lived there at one point?
No, I just went there. I spent 2 weeks there, New Year's, back when I was 13. And
oh, nice.
Yeah, no, I mean, there are some really beautiful parts of Australia, but whoo, boy. Oh, and the spiders, and the horse flies, too. And they have, what do you call them, cicadas? Yeah, like, for real. They're so gross.
Nature there is fucked, but I think the system there is a little better, so it's kind of a trade-off, so.
I'm looking at New Zealand, you know? If things ever really go tits up here in the United States, New Zealand's supposed to be really nice. Pretty far left government, at least by national standards. Really high standard of living. Weather looks nice, you know.
Like literally zero fucking COVID.
Yeah, yeah, they completely dealt with the COVID because they actually have a functioning federal government. Yeah, pretty amazing. What about Canada? Fuck them Canucks. Get them out of
Yeah.
here.
Fuck Canada. That's
Fuck
the
Canada.
one thing I want to have come from this conversation is
Fuck
fuck
Canada.
Canada.
Get them out of here. Fucking fake Americans. Our leaf people. Get them out.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much for having me on the stream.
No,
If
thank you
anyone
for
likes,
talking. Yeah, this is Ryan. This is Ryan Beard, or I believe at Ryan Beard Official on TikTok. I really appreciate you coming on. I had a great time talking. I know I rambled for like 90% of it. I hope that was appropriate given the format. I do like the sound of my own voice. It's an unfortunate character trait. Yeah, of course, but you know, live streamer, I kind of gotta. Thank you.
But yeah, if you guys like Bo Burnham style comedy or like Sacha Baron Cohen, Eric Andre, that kind of stuff, consider following my my YouTube channel as well. It's just Ryan Beard. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on, man.
I'm being asked, do you currently have a beard?
I currently cannot grow one because of my hormone deficiency.
I see. That's an interesting name choice that you were, I imagine, born with there.
Yeah, it's British, unfortunately. So I'm a
Oh,
colonizer.
I didn't even know. Well, you know what? You're one of the good ones.
I guess so.
Have a great one, okay?
Yeah, you too, man. Thanks.
All right, be well.